If you're not already subscribed to this YouTube channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button now, along with the bell icon so you can be notified whenever a new video is posted. And if you're already subscribed, check and make sure that YouTube hasn't unsubscribed you. And of course, be sure to give the video a like as well as share it on your social media. The white supremacists hate that. And now, the Sunday address. Don't know if you've heard, but apparently it turns out that Barack Obama was trying to cut Kamala Harris off at the knees. Jonathan Allen, an NBC reporter, is putting out a book that says Barack Obama tried to undermine Harris behind the scenes. This is hardly news. I talked about this very thing last year. The shills said that it wasn't true. You had the usual DNC shills and plants in the comments who were saying, oh, that's not true at all. This is just Trump and the Republicans pushing a bunch of rumors. It's just inside the Beltway gossip. The party is totally unified behind Kamala Harris. Well, it turns out the black grassroots weren't the only ones who were unenthused about a Kamala Harris candidacy. The magic Negro himself wasn't too thrilled either, albeit for his own personal reasons. Now, this Jonathan Allen guy hasn't said anything about those, but I'll tell you my take on it in a moment. But Allen has written that Obama was not willing to endorse Harris when he talked to the vice president on the day that Biden dropped out of the race. And from these reports, there were others in the party who knew what Obama's position was, and they were running scared. Negro Jim Clyburn, America's favorite sharecropper, he knew that Obama was going to come to him about having a vote on the convention floor for who the nominee should be. And that being the case, since the party had already decided, well, that would be too fracturing. That would split the party. It would be 1968 all over again. Clyburn hurried up and endorsed Harris so that he wouldn't have to get put on the spot by Obama. And even though Joe Biden's obvious cognitive decline was a huge albatross around his neck, it's also his policy positions that were hurting him too. That was why he was so freaking unpopular. Allen's book details, though, that Biden himself told Harris that she couldn't distance herself from his policy positions. Now, she's supposed to be getting the nomination, she's supposed to be the candidate, and he's telling her, well, you better go ahead and run on the exact same stuff I did. At the very least, you can't try to distance yourself from it. Why? Because Biden expected her to protect his legacy. His legacy? You have a president who's about to leave office, and he's demanding that people fall on their sword, all to protect his ego, legacy. Now, gee, where have we heard that one before?
Especially in the African-American community, I will consider it a personal insult, an insult to my legacy, if this community lets down its guard and fails to activate itself in this election.
Yeah, that sounds about right. The times may change, but the entitlement from these self-interested con men is exactly the same. It doesn't change at all. And even the way that Biden strong-armed Kamala is also part of standard operating procedure for the Democrats. He reportedly told her, no daylight, kid. In other words, there better not be any daylight between you and me. We're stuck together, joined at the hip, till your political death do us part. It wouldn't be the first time Kamala's name was involved in a maneuver like this. You'll recall I told you years ago, in fact several times, about how the California political machine swung into action to select, not elect, but select Kamala Harris to become senator. And it was low-down Willie Brown himself who cleared the field for her, personally telling then LA Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa, don't crowd Kamala. Because for a little while there, it seemed like Villaraigosa was going to throw his sombrero into the ring, but after Willie Brown spoke, it was pretty much understood the California political machine was behind Kamala Harris. She was the chosen tool. She has spent many years taking dictation from Willie Brown, so that only made sense. Villaraigosa, of course, obeyed. It was a bitter pill for him to swallow, but if you want to work for massa, the key requisite for the job is to learn how to eat crap and get used to the taste. Kamala had no problem with people having to eat garbage in order to benefit her, but now it was time for her to chow down on the same. So she couldn't say no, even if she knew that it was political suicide. She had just been forced to sign her own political death warrant. She now had to handcuff herself to the rotted, putrid corpse of Joe Biden's legacy, which had already dragged him down and was now going to do the same thing to her. But then again, massa's image will always be more important than the slaves. Kamala Harris bowed at the altar of white power, so she had to toe the line and see this one through to the bitter end. And she wasn't going to give so much as a peep of discontent because that's what a tool does. They obey without complaint. So Kamala Harris dutifully stuck to the script because no matter how the election turned out, she wanted to make sure that ultimately she would not be disconnected from the political machine that has handed her every crumb of her daily bread since at least the 1990s. That's taking the long view in the term of these political tools. I'm not trying to get caught up in the usual palace intrigue of the Democrats, though I do think it bears noting that there's no honor among sleaze, and no matter what the Democrat shills may have thought, the party was anything but unified behind Kamala Harris. Okay, here's my take on this and why I decided to make it the subject of this Sunday address. We need to think back to Barack Obama's little temper tantrum finger wagging at black men last year. Because I've already said I think that had far less to do with him thinking black men need to be strong-armed into supporting Kamala Harris and more to do with browbeating black men into supporting a female Democrat candidate no matter who it is. Why? Because that's what his whining was about, that black men needed to be conditioned to put aside their demands and vote blindly for a female candidate. Does Barack think that maybe he was making a lane for Michelle Obama? Well, it's certainly possible. I think he definitely wanted to test the waters. It would hardly be the first time that Obama was publicly pretending to campaign for a Democratic candidate while at the same time hoping they failed so that he could take advantage. Nobody was cheering for John Kerry to lose the presidential election in 2004 more than then Senate candidate Barack Obama was. Barack Obama was the young up-and-comer then, and he was telling everyone he had no designs outside of the Senate, that he would finish his full 6-year Senate term before even thinking about pursuing the presidency. Well, as we all know, he spent the first 2 years of his time in the Senate pulling attention-getting stunts like getting into spitball fights with dubious cabinet members before the cameras, and then he ran down to New Orleans to do some photo ops during Hurricane Katrina. After that, he spent his last 2 years in the Senate on the road running for president. He hadn't even fulfilled his full 6-year term yet because he never had any plans to. Hillary Clinton was the wife of a president, and she ran for office, and it's no stretch of the imagination to think that Barack Obama wouldn't mind if Michelle did the same thing. Only this time, what if she wins? And with Donald Trump trying to twist the media's tail by claiming he's actually considering a third run for president, it's no stretch of the imagination either to consider that maybe Barack Obama might decide that if Trump can run for a third term, so can he. And given how there's a total lack of charisma or star power on the Democratic side of the aisle, they could certainly use a candidate with all the personality they can get. Let me repeat, there's no honor among sleaze. At the end of the day, these people are all ultimately self-interested. And that's why it doesn't make any sense for black people to be loyal to these people, because they're certainly not loyal to us. And why shouldn't these guys decide that maybe Michelle Obama could become president? See, when Trump became president, a lot of people began thinking that, hell, if this clown could make it into the Oval Office, then literally anyone can. Trump proved that someone who had never held government office before, someone who had never even been married to a politician or even been close to a school board, much less the White House, if he could become president first try at bat, that meant the American people would literally elect anyone. Yes, Trump's lack of political experience was a plus for him, but that's not to say that he didn't have a platform of policies such as they are. The lessons Democrats seem to have taken from the Trump victory is that all you need is some name recognition and you too can become president. So yes, the effort to draft Michelle Obama, while a damned to fail delusion, is also something that a number of inside the Beltway Democrat shills think could be feasible, including Barack Obama. But this is not going to solve any problems for the Democrats. They're resorting to a bunch of tactics because ultimately they don't want to have to confront the party's real problem. Democrats deliberately turned their backs on their traditional economic stances decades ago, so as not to offend the right-of-center donors that they wanted to appeal to. So they decided to stick to discussing social issues and hot-button topics like abortion, issues that had nothing to do with the racial wealth gap. They deliberately have made the decision to avoid any and all issues that have to do with money changing hands. Now, this got them some momentum, but not enough to affect major elections. So the Democrats are abandoning more of their traditional platform, leaving them less and less distractions that they get to bring up, because that's also been part of their MO. How do they deal with the base who's saying, hey, you guys have turned your backs on us? Well, let's go ahead and say abortion. Let's go ahead and say transgenderism. Let's go ahead and say immigrants, this, that, and the third. anything but the money. But with people like Rahm Emanuel and others saying the party needs to move farther to the right, they're going to have to be abandoning even these distractions too. So what kind of cover are they going to have for themselves? The Democrats may think that they're skillfully avoiding the issue, but the reality is they're actually making it where the only thing that there will be left to talk about are economic policies, and that will make it excruciatingly clear that Democrats know exactly what they're supposed to do, but they're determined not to do it. It will be clear the problem isn't that Democrats don't think the policies their voters want will win elections. The problem is that they can no longer get away with talking working class on the campaign trail and then once in office doing whatever the 1% want. And black voters in specific must insist that our issues and our interest be at the center of all political discourse. You see, for decades after the Civil War, the lawmakers were determined not to say black. This government gave the white slave owners reparations, quote unquote, for having freed black people. And then when they were told about that 40 acres and a mule that we were owed, the response from the white government was, well, haven't we done enough for these people already? Then they began openly demonizing us. Reconstruction was hardly perfect, but was actually the first and only time that there had actually been real movement toward black empowerment in the broad political landscape. And as far as the white powers that be were concerned, both Democrat and Republican alike, all of that had to be dismantled. That's where the Compromise of 1877 came from, where Democrats and Republicans put their heads together and decided exactly how they were going to destroy what little progress had actually been allowed. That's where the race massacres of the late 19th and early 20th centuries came from. The white media went overboard to justify these genocides, including the New York Times. After that, it took 3 generations to force the word black back into the political discourse, and both Republicans and Democrats fought tooth and nail to keep that from happening. The two major parties couldn't agree on much, but they could agree that black had to be held back, and they happily worked together to keep that from happening. Now, we did adjust and prevail, but just like after the Civil War, we're now seeing this hyper-aggressive effort by both political parties putting their heads together to put the black political genie back in the bottle. Both parties have spent the last 60 years saying, haven't we done enough for these people? And now you got the Democrats openly saying it as well. Black was turned into a word not to be spoken again. We have pushed back against that. But we've seen that this time white power is trying to be more sophisticated. Instead of having open racists like in the 19th century or phony white liberals like in the 20th century, now they're using biracial and even foreign agents of color who claim to be one of us, all the while saying, haven't we done enough for you people already? Or, as Kamala Harris put it,
so I'm not going to sit here and say I'm going to do something that's only going to benefit black people. No.
So understand the con game that's going on inside and outside of the Beltway. Barack Obama still has his sights on the White House, and even though he can't exactly get the keys to the Oval Office back, he's still hoping to keep it in the family. So this is where the shaming tactics, I believe, are coming from. Barack Obama sees himself as setting up a possible Michelle Obama candidacy. Hell, knowing the way that he thinks, probably in his mind he's thinking that one of his daughters might run for high office at some point. And how the hell is she going to get there if Barack Obama, as a former president, can't vouch for her? If his name is Mud, that means that hers is too. Not because white housewives and white college-educated women turned their backs on the Democrats, but because black voters, the actual base and backbone of the party, they were the ones who turned their backs on this con game. And while I suppose that it's nice that you got some folks in the white media who are finally admitting to some of this stuff, the reality is black folks closed the book on this one a long time ago. Good evening, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Miss Scott, David Owens, Black Rye, Ronald Waits, and NLR Forever. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.